A surge of migrants entering from Mexico has overwhelmed Border Patrol at the southern border, and with shelters and processing centers over capacity, authorities in El Paso, Texas, have been forced to release more than 1,000 travelers ineligible for expulsion into the streets.
According to reporting from NewsNation, many migrants are congregating under overpasses in El Paso because they have no U.S. sponsors and lack the money needed to leave the area. Local authorities called the surge a, quote, manageable crisis, and say for every migrant seen on the streets of El Paso, 10 have been sent through the shelters to their final destination. Southwest correspondent for NewsNation, Ali Bradley, has reported extensively from the border. She was just in El Paso and now joins us from Phoenix, Arizona. Ali, welcome back to Rising.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Obviously, a really important topic to discuss today.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for your excellent reporting. Tell us a little bit about what you saw in El Paso and what you're seeing in Phoenix.
Yeah, so when we first arrived in El Paso, there were still hundreds of people on the street, and they were released by Border Patrol after being processed. So this does mean that they have documentation to claim asylum or to continue their journey in the United States. Now, when we went to the Welcome Center, some of that video that you saw inside, that's what the city is doing to help out a little bit. They have created a Welcome Center, kind of like a temporary shelter where they allow people to use charging stations. They allow them to connect with their sponsors if they have them. Now, you mentioned the sponsors. What I learned from the chief deputy of the city manager, he was explaining that at least 50% of these people have a sponsor or a family that they're linking up with, but that does mean that 50% of them don't. So those folks are going to be waiting for bus fare, a plane ticket, things like that. And so what happens is they actually are busing them to New York and Chicago. And so in New York, they have sent at least 50 buses that we know of right now. They have sent a few to Chicago, but what the city manager was asking for was 9 buses a day. And again, for the most part, those buses are going to be for people that don't have a sponsor because they are needing some assistance with transportation. So they have sent hundreds of migrants to New York and a few to Chicago as well. We did talk to a family from Venezuela. There's a young little girl in this video that you kind of keep seeing. She's in a blue t-shirt. Her name's Kamala. And she was telling us she's from Venezuela and she was really excited to go to school, really excited to meet friends. And what was really, really heartbreaking, you guys, is that she was talking about they just didn't have money or jobs and they didn't have money for food. She said, we were always hungry. And so to hear a 10-year-old girl talk about that was gut wrenching. And that is the tragic reality of what's happening here along the border. And again, these people have been processed and federally released. They have been released by basically the administration. These aren't just people that have crossed over and they can't be apprehended. They have been apprehended at this point. They have been released with documents, with paperwork. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But again, the city is doing what they can. They said they've already surpassed the $1 million mark. They will be seeking reimbursement for FEMA for that.
And what in taking them to Chicago and New York, places like that, what in theory is like the next step in the migrants' journey? Like, what are they hoping to get in those locations?
So those are locations where they might know somebody. They don't have a sponsor necessarily, but they might have family there. They might have somebody there. When we were talking with Camilla and her mom, they were saying that they know some people there, that they have some friends there, and they're hoping to work, hoping to start a better life. And so when they get to those destinations, that might bring them closer to where their final destination might be. Maybe they're not going to be living in New York. Maybe they're going to be going to New Jersey, but that gets them closer to where they're going to be versus being on the streets of El Paso.
Yeah, we watched your report and it is so heartbreaking. This beautiful little girl talking about how excited she is to get an education and make friends and how she was always hungry. But that seems a pretty clear-cut case of an economic migrant as opposed to an asylum seeker. I'm wondering if you have a sense of what the breakdown there was. I mean, they're here with papers to show up to court for asylum. Is that correct? And it doesn't seem like that case that she would qualify. Talk us through the difference between those things and what you saw on the ground.
Yeah, so one of the things that Alejandro Mayorkas says is that just being here and crossing illegally is not grounds for deportation, and every single migrant should have the opportunity to claim asylum. So I asked them if they're claiming asylum, and they said yes, but like you said, they weren't necessarily facing persecution when they were in Venezuela. They are more economic migrants. So when it comes down to it, they wouldn't qualify for asylum by the terms that the congressional law puts out, but they do have a right to claim. And so that will allow them to be here for, some of them don't have court dates for 2 to 5 years. So that once they say the word asylum, they get to go through that process.
That's because the system is so overwhelmed with cases just like these. I mean, you're creating a system where then you're going to have so many people seeking asylum, whether legitimate or not, and then it's going to take so long to adjudicate it. It's kind of de facto letting them stay here. And is it the case that they often have to be? Would these cases actually be heard in places like El Paso and Phoenix? Because you're talking about them moving elsewhere, do they have to come back here to appear in court?
No, they will get a reporting instructions for whatever destination they're going to. Okay, there's no way to get them to come back to El Paso. But you asked kind of about the breakdown. I would say from my experience, what I have seen when I've started covering this over about a year and a half ago, I would say we did have a lot of asylum seekers and qualified asylum seekers. Now, I would say it's majority economic migrants. Most of them just want to be here to work. Most of them just want to seek a better life. A lot of them have left their kids in other countries. We talked to a woman who was living on the streets for 2 days. She was trying to get to California to be with friends, and she left her 3 children in Peru because she was living in Peru after Venezuela. And she said that she did not expect this to be what she got, basically. She said this was not the American dream she hoped for. She thought she would get here and get documents and be able to start working right away. And that's just not the case. They can't legally work while they're claiming asylum. So they have to work under the table. So the messaging that's getting back is kind of crossing wires, and it's not necessarily the correct messaging. And the other thing is, we asked why El Paso right now, why the spike in El Paso? And the deputy city manager was telling us the messaging that's getting back to migrants is that it's safe to cross in El Paso right now. The river's dried out. They can walk right across. It is the next kind of big hub next to Eagle Pass where we're seeing people drown and lose their lives. So they know that they can cross right here. And they also know about the buses, he says. So the messaging right now is getting back to them that it's open, that they're going to be welcomed, that they're going to be bused if they don't have transportation. So those are the things that Kamala Harris is supposed to be kind of working on, is getting to the root of these problems and correcting the messaging.
It would seem like a huge kind of waste of opportunity, frankly, if they're going to be here anyway. They're going to be here for years while the asylum cases are being worked out. And you say you've talked to people who want to work, but who might have difficulty finding work only because of what the law allows them to do.
Yeah, it seems kind of interesting, right? If they want to be here to work and they're economic migrants and the door is pretty much open to them, why aren't we allowing them to pay into the system and pay taxes and be part of that? I don't know. I mean, again, it's forcing them to work under very, very tough conditions for very minimal pay. One woman that I talked to from Venezuela, who actually walked in the caravan with, who now lives in Oklahoma City, tells me that she's breaking stones to build pools, and it's extremely hard work, but she's not doing it legally. She's doing it under the table. And that is a situation that a lot of these migrants face once they get here, is they might have a job lined up and they know they're able to work, but it's not going to be legitimate work, right? And so that is a situation that a lot of people are calling on the administration to look at and to reassess the situation, because a lot of them can get those agricultural visas, but they need to be expanded outside of that if they're going to allow this.
Seems like that would be a no-brainer. Allie Bradley, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your reporting.
Thank you as always. Take care, you guys.
Thanks,
We'll be
Allie.
back with more Rising right after this.